Welcome to the Innovation Ecosystem Podcast. We interview remarkable and thought-provoking guests about innovation, leadership, and change in the world of business. Whether you're an executive or an entrepreneur, our objective is to help you and your organisation create an entrepreneurial culture, become more innovative, and better able to respond to change. Each week, we'll deconstruct world-class performance from the arenas of business, academia, science, and sports. Each week, you can expect key insights, fresh perspectives, and proven tools you can use straight away to make you more successful professionally and personally. With your host, Mark Bidwell.
Hello, this is Mark Bidwell, and welcome back to the Innovation Ecosystem Podcast. With me today is Dave Bruno, who's Head of Innovation for a very large Swiss bank. We cover quite a few areas, but there are three things that I wanted to call out. Firstly, Dave covers how he actually puts teams together to fulfill his mandate of disrupting culture within a large, highly regulated, historically very successful bank. Secondly, what he goes into is some of the threats and the opportunities that are posed by emerging technologies, such as robo-advisors, blockchain, trust, and privacy. And thirdly, what you're going to learn is how does he actually prioritize his projects to make sure they don't have to go head-to-head with many of the large technology projects that characterizes financial services incumbents today. So I think you'll find this particularly interesting if you're involved in driving innovation in large organizations. So this is Mark Bidwell, host of Innovation Ecosystem Podcast. With me today is Dave Bruno, who's Head of Innovation at a major Swiss bank. Welcome to the show, Dave.
Good morning, Mark.
So who is Dave Bruno?
In short, I'm a guy who founded an innovation function because that's very in to do these days. So I've been fortunate to be in the right position at the right time. I originally came from finance, so I studied as a US CPA and trained with PwC back in the day. I've done quite a lot of different work with international banks over the years, and in the past 10 years have been in the banking industry. So when it came time to start kind of self-disrupting or working on innovation full-time about 3 or 4 years ago, and it got in vogue, I jumped on the opportunity and created a function for it.
And I think you describe yourself and your team as working at the intersection of new business and new technology. And the other piece you say is you use fundamental research to do a search for new business models. So can you explain a bit more about what does that mean?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in trying to do things with intention. So if you're going to set a goal for yourself or for your team, to really go after something that means something to you. So, from my personal life, when I was skydiving as a younger guy, I set a goal to get on a record attempt, and over the next 3 years, got onto a record attempt. And at the time, the world record was around 100 people for skydiving formation, and I managed to be the youngest guy on that skydive. And no one even knew I was there. I was kind of a ghost who showed up and did it. I think you have to set goals, and with innovation, it's the same. I don't think you can just randomly look at startups and the flavor of the day, like artificial intelligence is this year or the blockchain, and innovate on that. I think you need to fundamentally research what you want to achieve and then set about what you want to bet on and then take the risks to get there. And that's what I meant by fundamental research.
And so I mean, what are the goals of your team at the moment? I mean, you obviously operate in an enormous organization with a global reach with, I think, close on $1 trillion of assets. What are your objectives of your team at the moment?
Well, there's a really fine mix between what you can do, what you want to do, and what you're able to do. I think that
what you can from a regulatory point of view, you mean?
Yeah. From a reg perspective. So you have to stay within the compliance and legal and regulatory, but at the same time, our goals are to be able to disrupt the organization culturally, actually. So we're a little bit like a SEAL team, and I like to use a lot of military analogy because I grew up in a military family. So although I'm not militant myself, I think that our goals in the organization are to change it fundamentally, to find new business models, to find what's called new P&L. So new revenues, new profitability for the firm in places that people weren't looking already. So I'll give privacy as an example as one of the themes where we think the future of wealth management has a lot to do at the core with trust and privacy, and that should be a revenue item as well.
Yeah, yeah. I'm curious. I had a previous guest on who studied Swiss organizations, and as you probably know, but maybe our listeners don't. I mean, there's Swiss National Service. A lot of the hierarchies in the Swiss National Service tends to find its way into some of the larger Swiss organizations. Does this military kind of analogy that you use, how does it land in your around your Swiss-based peers?
It's funny. A lot of the senior guys really get it because they're colonels. We don't have generals in the Swiss Army unless we're in times of war, but we do have very senior guys who take senior positions at banks, and they actually get what we're trying to do. They've been very supportive. The problem that you have within the banking industry is in the middle layer of people whose job it is to stop things that look different.
Yeah.
And we come in shorts and t-shirts with a different kind of looking product, right? So we may create an app that kind of looks like Tinder, right? And left and right swipe potential recommendations, and that puts up alarms everywhere because it's supposed to by rule. And so then you need to be a little bit of a Che Guevara, I'll say it. My son's middle name, I actually named him after Che Guevara. His middle name is Che. I think you need to be a little bit guerrilla in your tactics and find out who you need to align with, and then go explain your story and get their advice rather than running up against people in a committee. It's really good to have people on board beforehand.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I don't know, how big is your team? And then secondly, how do you actually staff the team for, how do you put together the different skills given what you've talked about, the military analogy that you use?
That's a spot on question. I think stay small. I mean, in the SEALs, you never send in more than 12 or 20 guys into a mission. We actually based around that number. So I've had 12 to 15 guys for the last few years. And I believe in the mix of skills. So as I said, I'm a trained finance guy, so I can beat up an NPV business case or look at whether we have potential revenues pretty well. But I have the guy sitting next to me as I'm on this call with you is Giorgio is a hardcore programmer. He's been able to make a lot of the stuff that we want really fast, sometimes using techniques that we wouldn't use inside the banking industry. And I have a couple designers on staff. I have a great comms guy. And I think this cross-pollination of people. I also have a politics guy. If you've read your Machiavelli, you need a guy who's out there selling your story very well and aligning people. And I think you need that mix of people, just like in a SEAL team. There's guys to breach doors, there's guys to shoot, and there's guys to think. And you need all of that in a team.
Interesting. And coming back to the NPV piece, I mean, you can knock those up on the spreadsheet. I mean, given the asset base that your bank has and, the source of very profitable businesses, I mean, how can you move the needle? I mean, what are you looking for before you start putting resources behind a new business model or a new concept in terms of not so much peak revenues, but I mean, potential opportunity that you're looking at?
Well, I think for people who are listening to this, that is a key question. If you base all your innovation focus around just NPV, you'll be doing change the banking industry or change your industry. So you'll end up in the IT pipeline and be assessed against other projects that probably have a better return. So to differentiate yourselves as real innovators, you need to take some risk as well. And you need to say, we're not sure this is going to work. The business case is kind of all over the place, but this is one that we want to take a strategic bet on because the magnitude of the opportunity is so big that it suspends our disbelief, like you do when you start reading any kind of novel. So you kind of have to put yourself in that suspense situation and say, we have a higher chance of failing on this one, but we're still going to take the risk.
Yeah.
So it needs executive veto.
And so, I mean, privacy, you mentioned privacy and trust, which you think is a big space. I mean, are we in the realms of blockchain here? Is that what you mean by trust? And I mean, maybe you can say a little bit about that. And how does that, how did you manage to suspend, or how do you get people to suspend their belief? I mean, or their disbelief? What's the narrative around that particular opportunity once you've explained it?
Yeah, privacy as a topic is pretty hard, and yet it runs. If you look at the core values of any bank, being private about what you're doing is pretty important for people because their money is super important to them. And I'm not talking about anything illegal. I'm talking about the fully natural human instinct to not lose all your eggs that you've worked hard for all your life, and you want to protect and grow them over time. And privacy is core to that. And I think as an extension of that out of the banking model, there's a lot that people are faced with today in the digital world that scares the crap out of them. So, you can lose a lot of your good investments, as people did in Bitcoin in the early days, right? Mm-hmm. If you make some, badly informed mistakes, you can also lose your personal reputation, which a lot of the people that I've talked to who are more wealthy say their reputation, their family, their health is much more important than their actual bank account. And, I feel that way. And I think offensive privacy services, right? And I'll use a funny example, if you don't mind, for the listeners. This is meant to be funny, so don't take it too serious. But I always say, if a very famous country rock star's daughter turns up on the Las Vegas Strip half naked, that has serious reputational risk if that hits into Instagram. And, institutions that protect privacy go after the internet and delete things. They protect people's privacy actively. They let the person know that a breach has just happened. And what are the options that I can do about this? Also talking over telephones and working in the internet, you're leaving a lot of trails. And so if you're more wealthy, you want those trails to be protected. So, there is almost no password you can think of that isn't hackable.
Yep.
And that privacy of data and also the transport of your identity in the future, you mentioned the blockchain. I think those are really important things.
Interesting. People understand that viscerally, I guess. I'm sure your executives who you talk to and pitching this understand that. But I mean, what about economics? I mean, is this ultimately, a source of differentiation in terms of, this will attract new customers, or is it about retaining existing customers? I mean, how do you make the numbers work? Because ultimately, it's a public company, your bank, right?
It is, and I think when Dropbox launched, their minimum viable product, the MVP and the insider innovation speak, was a YouTube video. And when they got to about 100,000 clicks, this is the famous story that's in Eric Ries's book, right? Mm-hmm. People jumped on it, and the venture capitalists were able to jump in, and they got their angel funding. And, there was already 100 Dropboxes out there, but they simplified it around one proposition and killed it. I mean, I use Dropbox. Everybody I know uses Dropbox. And is it fully private? No. Do I trust that it's private? No. So I never put anything in there like passwords or anything, but people need private storage of things. So as currencies and other forms of wealth go fully digital, you need to be able to protect those. And also let's say your private key eventually for the blockchain smart contract stuff. Your identity becomes more important than the original wealth that you were trying to protect, because you could lose everything in one go.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're a founder of a company called YNOME, which is is it around robo-advisors, and to an extent, I mean, what is that another area of potentially source of disruption or source of opportunity for the bank?
Yeah, I mean, for those who are listening from the banking industry, I think you've got to look beyond robo, right? I mean, we know at this point, I've talked with more than 100 robos who are in process of launching or have launched. There's more than 500 on the way. So it's been done since 2011, and there's a lot of different angles of robo, but that isn't the end of finance, and I don't see it as particularly disruptive. And I know that's not always du jour to say, but I'm aware of the landscape of what kind of traction they're able to generate. And I think if you look at the big banking industry who have also launched robo, it proves out the fact that it's just a user experience. It's building a last mile to a client that's simpler to understand, is a little bit more transparent. But the big ones, I mean, when Schwab Intelligence Portfolios launched, I was watching the stock price on that day. It went up 11%. So, they were able to generate many billions of assets in only a few months of time, whereas some of the smaller robos struggled to generate their first couple of 100 millions, let's say. And I think the scale, the lever you have in your hands as a big institution to copy what the robos have done is totally there. There's no patenting going on that I've seen. And therefore, I'm not threatened by it as much as we're learning from it and getting to know the founders from it.
I mean, that's the big question, I guess, is, an incumbent in an industry facing enormous regulatory pressure, where there is the breakdown of trust as a result of not only scandal, but also 2008 and these data breaches. I mean, there are lots of, as well as this wave of fintech startups, many of which you're involved in, I know, back into Europe, but into London. I mean, there are lots of people who are questioning, I suppose, what is the long-term sustainable business model of the banking industry? And what you're saying, I guess, with robo is that this is a source, could be a source of competitive advantage for the incumbent.
I think the incumbents who actually embrace it and see that the younger generation, if you watch some of my YouTube videos, you see I have a chat with millennials who are in my team. And, what they say is, all this dramatic banking stuff, we don't get. I just need this on my iPhone or whatever, my Samsung, and I need it to be super easy and simple. And I think a lot of the robos have actually cracked this, making this simpler. And some of the models, like Personal Capital, actually embrace the personal advisor into the concept. And the incumbents do that as well, usually. And I think it's that mix of traditional with the new technologies. And there isn't much tech in robo, but there's actually a great user experience that makes it differentiating. And if I'm able to, I wouldn't mind saying a word about YNOME as well. We're looking out beyond robo into a greenfield, what we call a greenfield. We think that with all the new financial providers on the market, plus the transaction-only shops, the asset managers, the hedge funds, as a consumer, you're totally confused about how you should go about managing your wealth, especially if you only have, let's say, between 250,000 and 5 million in wealth, which sounds like a lot to most people, but there's a big chunk of society that has that amount of wealth and doesn't know how to go about self-managing it. So, kind of the YNOME value prop is about making stuff more transparent and simpler and putting the robos on the same platform as the big banks and saying, which provider should I use to do which job most effectively for me?
Interesting. So this is Mark Bidwell, founder of Innovation Ecosystem. With me today is Dave Bruno, head of innovation at a large Swiss bank, and we're talking about disruption. We're talking about robo. We're talking, what I'd like to do, you mentioned the millennials earlier on, Dave. I mean, obviously in a bank your size, there's a huge population of millennials working in that bank. How do you interact with them, and how do you take advantage, obviously, of their insights around, what they want as consumers in your efforts to innovate for the bank?
I'm actually glad that's a really good question, because a lot of our mandate, what I said in the first, I think, question is cultural. We're seen as a lighthouse for a lot of people. So, we're able to play with Oculus Rifts and Google Glass and HoloLenses and things which are, let's say, virtual reality related. And a lot of the younger people just totally tune into that, not just from the tech aspect, but also that we have some freedom and are able to do something new. And so a lot of the people that are, let's say half my team is actually trainees or interns. They're young people who are just with the bank actually 6 months. They don't know anything about banking. What they know about is, as a consumer, I've got new skills, and my skills are fully digital. And I selfishly then learn all the skills from our millennials. So recently I've been playing with Snapchat. For me, it's too young of a dynamic, this constant, Instagram-y, photograph myself stuff. But at the same time, I totally get it. And you need to be able to get it and bridge the gap as a manager in a financial institution these days. And I know a lot of, the most senior folks, they look at their kids and they see this exact dimension and they copy their kids, right? So, everybody got on Facebook reluctantly, but by the time we got to Snapchat, people just load the app.
Yeah. Do you do anything like reverse mentoring? I mean, how do you keep the board members connected with the millennial population in your organization? I mean, any mechanisms that you've tried that either work or have failed dismally?
Yeah, I mean, the problem for any bank right now, if you look at the statistics around who joins a bank, back when I was joining a bank, they would get 20, 30% of the Harvard students or, talents. And these days, the real talent goes to Silicon Valley. They go to startups and they become entrepreneurs themselves at a young age. I don't have anybody in my team who doesn't run another company. Really? And the average age in my team is probably 29, 30. I'm the old fart. So, I think, the guy who's running 3 companies on the side, who was sitting next to me before, all those companies are running well because, he's able to differentiate between what he can do with what he's learning from the bank and what he already knew, and deploy the skills in both skill sets. And I think this gig economy is going to get us better skills in the bank, and we have to accept that.
Well, and obviously, I mean, I can imagine if you were pitching to your, senior leadership that you're going to build a team, and many of them are going to be working on other projects or running other businesses, it would raise eyebrows. But I mean, I think one of the things here for me is that the management challenge of the late 20th century was managing the matrix. Today, I think it's managing the ecosystem. Because the reality is you're never going to have all the resources you need, the expertise around the table at the right time in the right form. So your ability to bring people in and attract them into the organization and bring their skills is a huge source of competitive advantage if you can get it right. So, I mean, what does that mean as a leader? I mean, how do you make that case firstly, and then secondly, how do you screen? How do you think about bringing people on if they're saying, "Well, Dave, I've got 2 other businesses I'm really excited about." I mean, give us a couple of examples, perhaps.
Oh yeah, I can. The guy sitting across from me, filming me right now, is a guy named Phil, and he's the latest guy into my team. And he's a startup founder, so he actually started up a company in the UK and sold it. And now he's gigging with me because we're launching YNOME, and he sees an opportunity to work on something that can go a little bit even bigger because it's from a finance industry. And I think you have to attract people in that way. So I didn't wait for him to come in at a tie and beg me for a job and look at his CV. I never looked at his CV in that sense, actually. HR does that. What I looked at was the person, and does he have hard skills that I don't have? And I think, from the banking industry, that's going to be the huge cultural shift. If you think, how many thousands of people do you have working on product distribution? And yet none of them put up YouTube videos. None of them answer questions on Quora. None of them have a strong LinkedIn profile. The firms prohibit them from even putting a background picture into their LinkedIn profile. They don't speak very well at conferences, and they're not comfortable doing something like this, like a podcast. I think that's the past. I think the future is this. You've got to be able to share your knowledge and give value, and then you get value back in the form of potential clients. And it's give to get.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I remember at Syngenta, I tried to create a load of YouTube videos and we couldn't get access. So we went round through a Vimeo account and that worked. But the reality is that there are constant, and you and I have experienced this trying to set up the original conversation. There are lots of reasons to for this not to work, but I guess you've got to demonstrate a little bit of resilience and resourcefulness around workarounds. When we spoke the other day, Dave, you talked about 2 books that you gave out, and oddly enough, it's exactly what I used to do in Syngenta. So it's a business model canvas by Alex Osterwalder and Lean Startup by Eric Ries. Beyond those, what else do you do to equip your team to do battle? Because you did use that language as well. You talked about this being, you're at war. Internally, I think the proposal was. How do you gear up these people who you've brought in to actually be effective in what can be probably quite a challenging environment in the hallways of the executive suite of the bank, for instance?
Well, I'll tell you one painful example. I hired a young designer. She came to change the world, and she left after 3 weeks because she couldn't get used to the fact that part of the job is to actually still do PowerPoint. And I am a big hater of PowerPoint. I like to make stuff, and I like my team to make stuff. But the fact is, you still need to do inside the financial institutions. You have to take the good with the bad. The average startup founder is fighting to get a next angel round. He's fighting to get customer traction. He's fighting to get a good brand out there that people get. You get all that for free when you're coming from finance. The stuff you have to fight with is legal compliance. Does this make sense to launch in that market? Have I aligned this senior guy or that senior guy? But you just have a different set of challenges. One of my guys who came out of Silicon Valley from the last 15 years, he spent there launching companies and products. He always says that, so I'm quoting a guy named Alessandro. And I think his perspective is exactly right. So if you're under 30, you kind of get that if you're coming to a financial institution, you're going to have a different challenge. And you're going to have to take some of the bad stuff, but you get a lot of good as well. So the lever you have in your hands to change the world is actually pretty huge.
Yeah, absolutely. And example, how have you had examples of people in your team who've gone on into, started to pursue a more traditional career in the banking industry, or are these people essentially unemployable because by a large organization because they're constantly exposed to some fantastic, startup opportunities from people who are actually moving far more quickly?
Yeah, I'm actually describing the most employable people I've ever met. They're the most deployable troops I've seen in the last 10 years, right? The problem is if you're trying to hire, and all of my fellow banking managers out there who are trying to hire, I tell you, you have to go about this in kind of a weird way. So, everybody's kind of a project manager, right? Because if you go about the traditional way of hiring and you let HR kind of find the right guy, they find a sort of centric guy who went to the right university, speaks the right way, came in for the interview. That guy usually doesn't have enough sharp skills. If you really want to be an innovation chief, you got to seek the outsiders, the outliers. That's another favorite of my books from Malcolm as well, right? I only work on my strengths, and my weaknesses as a person are that whole alignment thing and staying project management organized and informing people. And so I hire people to cover those weaknesses. And I think if everybody in the team is enabled to do their strengths at the strongest and just work on those, and you ignore their weaknesses and cover them with other people, you're running a really good function. And I think, that diversity, what I described earlier, is what you got to go for.
Yeah. Now, let's get practical. Back into the realms of the core organization. I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of employees, or certainly tens of thousands of employees the bank has got, but many of them are, let's say, they've been in the industry for 20 years. They've got a good client base. They're probably going to stay in the industry, assuming the company remains, viable in the future, longer term. What's the emerging model of leadership, if you like, or what do these individuals need to do differently to, I won't say get with the program because that sounds a bit derogatory, but essentially to really take advantage of some of the opportunities that you're seeing in the market and you're bringing to them?
Yeah, I think to speak to people's hearts and to really keep them in working on our problem. And I say that as now a bank manager, right? So I'm an innovation, but a bank manager as well. To work on our financial thing, it's not one of the world's biggest problems. The world's biggest problems are about transporting our thought leadership out into the universe and replicating ourselves before we use the resources. They're big, big, big problems, right? Money itself is not a problem, as an industry and how money is managed. The scalability of it, the user interface of it, whether people actually are still attracted to it, how they get advice in the digital world. These are problems we're working on, but they're smaller. And you need to motivate people from their heart that this is worth working on. And I think that's, for people who don't come from wealth and are hungry for a lot and they want to think big, it's really hard to attract them into the finance industry. So you have to show them it's more than just Wolf of Wall Street. You might get a boat out of this someday, right? Because people don't really want a boat or a nice car anymore. I mean, I don't even have a car. And the older generation who are in the bank, they're still attracted to cars and things. And so there's a generational difference happening. And I'm trying to bridge the gap because the younger folks coming on, they're never going to get that, search for Maseratis. They're after life. They're after going to Indonesia next week and then the following week to Scotland and getting new experiences. And our clients are just like that too.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, it's fascinating you say that. One of our guests from the previous season was a guy called Gerard Adams, who sold his business Elite Daily to the Daily Mail for 50 million at the age of 27 or something. He's based in New York. Amazing guy. I mean, his big insight was, success without fulfillment is the ultimate failure. And I guess I'm wondering, they say the next generation the millennials want to bring their dreams to work. They want to bring their purpose to work. But what can you offer for the let's say the person who's achieved the level of success from the industry, but is still in the industry, still wants to continue? I mean, how do you engage? How do you get them to switch from the Maserati to the purpose mindset?
That's really funny. That's a great question. A lot of them have. Especially the ones with self-confidence and who are influential in the organization. So I'll give you an example. When the Apple Watch came out, in the pre-release phase, there was this buzz around it, right? And the non-financial industry does that really well, creating buzz around a product that doesn't exist yet, right? If you look at Tesla or whatever, and they get inspired by that, even the 40-year-olds, the 50-year-olds, the almost 60-year-olds. And I don't know a single senior bank manager who didn't have an Apple Watch the week it got released. So they're into tech, they're into the new worlds, but they're not quite comfortable with it yet in terms of executing it in their business, but they're trying. And so I think if you go about just always, I use the fighting analogy, not in the sense of fighting against the organization, but bringing the fight to the world. Because if you just go around biting people and saying, you're not good enough to handle this, you won't get anywhere as an innovation manager. You've got to go and say, look, I know where you're at. I understand. I talked to your team. We think this might fit. What do you think? And get advice. And I think you'll bring that older generation backwards and you bring the younger guys forwards. And it's really not that hard to convert people. I'll give you an example. Again, we're working on, voice products, and Amazon has a voice product out in the market. And every call I've gotten on, the more senior compliance and legal and reg guys all go, oh yeah, I bought one for my kids. And my kid uses it for the following. Is that a problem? And so I'm giving them advice about how to use a tech product with their kid, which is really weird, but that builds trust. So I don't think, there's no bad guys.
Yeah. And 5 years ago, it would have been a completely different story, I guess. So, I mean, I would imagine that the time it's very ripe for doing this kind of work in your environment.
It seems timely, and that's why I kind of jumped on it. But I don't know when the good days end. I always assume this is kind of my last day, but that gives me full power every day. And I just work in those strength zones of where should we be. So, open finance is one other theme that we have. And the concept of open APIs, if you know what I mean. So the applications that are open to the outside world from the banking industry is just a forbidden topic. And I think trying to break through that with an icebreaker every day in every conversation you have is important to let people know that what the millennials want, the generation coming who's about to get the wealth, they want to be able to compare horses in the race. And they want to see how is this provider and that provider and how are these products doing, because they want it to be simple and comparable. So the concept of open API just has to be here. And yet, it's going to take a long time to move the finance industry towards that. It hasn't had the regulatory support and it's difficult to change policies in a day. So
yeah, absolutely. And enormously threatening for the incumbents who, who've done very well out of avoiding that kind of model.
Yeah. Keeping the fences up, right?
Yeah,
has been a traditional strength set of the banking industry. And I don't say that as an enemy of banking. I work in banking, but it's been one of our things is put up big walls and shields. If you walk through the city of London past the Bank of England, I always do on my way to work in London. Mm-hmm. It's massive. The walls are like something like 25 meters high of this big white impenetrable stone with big steel gates. That's the image that people have of banking. And so when you say open API and you try to yell it over that wall, you just wait for, burning oil to drop down on you.
But as you say, it's worked very well. But I mean, the times are changing very quickly. Quick question, Alibaba. I mean, I've done quite a lot of sort of research into that for a previous interview. I mean, how... And they completely disrupted not disrupted, but they were able to access enormous resources very, very quickly from, deposits from their customer base. I mean, how active do you see them? How much of a threat are they for you sitting in Zurich thinking about a long-term banking industry?
I think that they're, now on an international perspective, I think Switzerland, like other locations, US, UK, Jersey, Guernsey, there's been these locations which have attracted wealth, not for any illegal reasons, just for the reason that they're a neutral alternative, safe, and a little bit boring. I think that the new providers coming out of the emerging market where most of the wealth is being grown these days, if you read your WealthX reports, to give them a plug, in China and Southeast Asia, that's where the wealth is coming from, and it's young wealth, and it's new wealth, and it's trying to acquire itself culture as it goes along. And Alibaba is probably doing an awesome job. Tencent's doing an awesome job. Even Line as a social media channel. Because they've got millions and millions of eyeballs a day. Mm. And as long as you've got that, just like Facebook, you've got access to potential customers and you can tell your story.
Yeah. And they've also got a lot of trust, as a result of the quality of the relationships they have with those eyeballs, I guess.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I mean, people do trust direct messenger and Facebook, don't they? And it's replaced the telephone for millennials already. So.
Yeah, interesting. So just beginning to wrap up, I'm with Dave Bruno, who's head of innovation. This is Mark Bidwell, head of innovation at a major Swiss bank. So Dave, I sent you 3 questions earlier on before we came on the show. First one, what have you changed your mind about recently?
I came up with 2 things, and I'll do them real quick. One is my approach to health. I switched over from being a long-distance athlete back to strength training because I'm with my young people in my team on this. They all do CrossFit. And strong is the new skinny. So I changed my mind about being a distance athlete, which is what most 40-year-olds do. But I changed that and went back to deadlifting, which sounds funny, but there we go. The second thing is handing over what I built recently. So this, kind of the innovation thing, it's super exhausting. Mm. And if you're going to try to be an innovation spearhead in your company, I'll tell you, be in for the long term, be in for the marathon on this one, because every day is pretty exhausting if you have to run into roadblocks and fail 95% of the time on what you're trying to do. You have to really savor those 5% moments when you actually get a product out and a client looks at it or somebody looks at it and says, hey, I really love this. You got to celebrate it. Take the team out for beers and you feed off that energy because 90% of what you're doing is really hard. But I changed my mind about just kind of walking away from it because, over the summer break, you always have that thinking.
Yeah.
What am I doing? Is it worth it to keep going at this pace? But this is kind of the gear that I'm in, and it feels still pretty good. So I changed my mind. I'm sticking with it.
Okay, good. What do you do to remain creative and innovative and fresh, if you like, and get your obvious energy that you've, that comes through this call? I mean, what do you do?
Really basic stuff. Like we talked about young people quite a lot, culture, which I'm really appreciative of today. I've been Snapchatting the past 2 weeks. I find that super fun because, just personally with people who, learning new skills, like doing video, using new interactive relay chat, tweeting for me 2 years ago wasn't something that I had done. And now I do it all the time. And I think these new skills in the digital world are really important to learn and it gives people a lot of pleasure. And the second one is also simple. I've been reading about gravitational waves since that story broke about 6 months ago. And I kind of throw the random dice in Wikipedia quite a lot, and especially around the topics of the universe. And I find that Einstein's theory of relativity, I still don't get, that time is not constant. It blows me away. And so, remaining creative and innovative is your question. I think reading about stuff that isn't from what you're looking at every day. So I don't want to read anything more about the banking industry. Mm. I only read about the universe and time travel and things which inspire me to keep active. And a lot of guys do that as well that I know.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you for that. And then final question. I mean, to what would you attribute your success in life to this point?
Yeah, so like the mindset that I've been able to deploy. I mean, like I think being able to pivot on the fly and thrive in chaos. And like I said, I come from that, kind of military way of being. So, being in the middle of the fight is where I want to be. And there's only a certain number of people like that. And you have to then be able to understand these three guys, they don't want to be in the fight, but I need them. So what do I do with them? How do I deploy them? And that long-term team thing. But for me personally, it's that thriving in chaos and taking on a no fear approach. So don't conform, don't try to fit in is my kind of advice, especially if you're going to try to be innovative, which is what this podcast is about. Don't wear the tie if you don't want to, or do if it fits you, but do it your way and be authentic about yourself. Speak the way you really speak. And people, they flock to that like moths to a flame, right? Just they love when people are really authentic. And I think that's what the older generation is still trying to learn, is that authenticity. Don't use slides, just tell stories.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's interesting you say that. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this show, actually, because to your earlier point around the skills, the tools, this is, when you've been in a large organization for many years, or the corporate environment, as you come out and start, interacting with the world in a very different way, it's remarkable what one can expose oneself to. And it's, from a personal point of view, I've, learned a huge amount. And I have to say also, Dave, I mean, when we set this up, this was not the conversation I expected to have with the head of innovation for a large Swiss bank. So, this is very, very fresh. It's very reassuring in many respects, as I'm sure a lot of our listeners will agree with me. Now, where can people get in touch with you?
Probably over Twitter. And once you have the contact, then direct message is the easiest way. It's easier than email. So I'm at Super Dave Bruno on Twitter. That's probably the best way. Or you can find me on Quora as well.
Super. And we'll put all that in the show notes. Well, Dave, I mean, it's been a great pleasure having you on the show today. I mean, I'm sure our audience will have enjoyed it as much as I did. And many thanks for your time.
You're very welcome. That was a real pleasure. Thanks for the great questions, Mark.
Thanks. Bye.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Hi, this is Mark again. I found that interview very, very refreshing. It wasn't what I was expecting at all. One of the things that really did surprise me was Dave's perspective that a lot of these new technologies are not necessarily purely going to provide benefit for the new entrants, but obviously the incumbents will be able to take advantage of these technologies to continue to grow their businesses and maintain and retain clients. So that's very different from a lot of the stuff that you read in the media around the hugely disruptive power of fintech. Another thing that really caught my eye was, and on reflection, I wish I'd done more of this, is how do you actually engage with senior management? What are your strategies and what are your tactics that you are able to use, not just to win over their minds, which is where we tend to spend a lot of our time, but also their hearts? And Dave's clearly, a past master at that. And he's also touching on themes that have been that we uncovered in earlier interviews around building bridges, around actually engaging with people at the emotional level as well as the intellectual level. So lots of things that Dave does very well, and I'm sure that if you're interested in finding out more about it, reach out to Dave. The details are in the show notes, and I'm sure he'll be very willing to share some of the approaches that he uses. And thirdly, I was intrigued by the kinds of people that he's actually able to attract onto his team, their backgrounds, their skill sets, the fact that many of them are in businesses on the side, but nonetheless he's able to attract them into this, what one might imagine as a reasonably conservative organization, a Swiss bank after all, and is able to attract them and to retain them and help them succeed in his activities and the group's activities. And as he said, these are very, very employable people, very deployable people as well. So lots in there. Reach out to Dave if you've got any questions. I'm sure he'll be very willing to help. He's an extremely open and collaborative guy, and I'm very pleased to have met him and to have started having some conversations, which I think will be very valuable for a lot of the listeners going forward. So now giving you some knowledge, but as we know, knowledge isn't power; it's only potential power. So I'd urge you to take advantage of this material. Go onto the website, have a look at the transcript, perhaps look at the videos that are out there as well, and take advantage of Dave's wisdom and his obvious track record in this area, and take what's relevant and useful into your work environment. And until next time, I wish you a good week. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, mark@innovationecosystem.com. And please feel free to share this information with others in your network, such that we can ensure these messages are going out as widely as possible to the innovation ecosystem. Until next time, have a great week.